right, we'll go ahead and get started. Welcome to Responsible Budget Talks number 2, Moving Legislators. This is the second in a series of webinars by the Responsible Budget Coalition. Thank you all for participating. We have another great turnout today. These webinars are not only open to members of the Responsible Budget Coalition, but all who are interested in responsible state budgeting in Illinois. Today we'll be discussing effective techniques for talking to your state lawmakers. About the Responsible Budget Coalition, or RBC, it's a coalition of over 250 organizations from across the state fighting for a fully funded budget with new revenue that invests in Illinois' children, families, and communities. It includes organizations that serve children, families, veterans, seniors, and people with disabilities, education groups concerned about early learning, K-12, and higher education, labor unions, faith-based and civic organizations, immigrant and refugee families, and many others. We have 3 principles that bring us together. Number 1, adequate revenue to support state priorities and make smart investments. 2, no more cuts to vital programs and services. And 3, fairness in raising revenue. Since a year ago, the RBC has doubled in size. We signed up our 277th member organization this past week. And we're an organization that relies on its members for expertise and to take action to move Illinois towards a responsible budget. My name is Neal Waltmire. I'm the Senior Communications Manager with the Responsible Budget Coalition. I'm co-monitoring today's webinar with my colleague Jennifer Cushman, who is the Field Coordinator and Policy Specialist for the Responsible Budget Coalition. We have a number of panelists from our RBC organizations that you'll hear from later. All right, let's briefly discuss today's logistics. We'll have for you here for an hour today with some presentations and 2 question and answer sessions. After I'm finished going through these logistics, our co-moderator Jennifer Cushman will provide an overview of effective advocacy techniques, including the definition of a successful meeting with lawmakers. Then we'll have a role play session from 4 RBC members here in Chicago in order to give you a realistic portrayal of how a meeting with your legislator about the budget might go. That will be followed by 10 minutes of question and answer. You should see a control panel in the right-hand corner of your screen. There's a box where you can ask us a question. Just type the question in the box and press enter. We'll see those questions and answer as many as we can. Don't worry, because we'll have another question and answer session later in the program. Following that, we'll show you a slightly different scenario of a meeting with a lawmaker. We recorded that role play with a group of RBC members down in Springfield last Tuesday, and we'll show that video to you. And after that session, Jennifer had a debrief with those participants, so you'll see a short video about that. And that will be followed by a 10-minute question and answer session. Again, that control panel in the right-hand corner, you can type questions and we'll answer as many as we can. After that, Jennifer will close with some brief remarks. So with that, I'll turn over to my co-moderator, Jennifer Cushman.
Great, thanks, Neal. So in a few minutes, we'll be watching a role play to demonstrate some best practices for meeting with your legislator to advocate for a responsible budget. We have some RBC members who will be doing this demonstration. Those are Sam Tuttle of Heartland Alliance will be the legislator, and John Bouman of the Shriver Center, Martin Torres of Latino Policy Forum, and Nia Kelly of the Chicago Coalition for the Homeless are the constituents. And we'd like to first point out to you a few best practices that you can keep your eye out for as you watch the demonstration. The first is to keep in mind what makes meeting with your legislator successful. There are 3 things. 1, that you delivered your message clearly. 2, that you made a concrete ask of your lawmaker. And 3, that you held your lawmaker accountable in a constructive way. A few other tips for having a successful legislative meeting are knowing what you want your 2 to 3 main points to be, to give specific examples of how people are impacted, preferably in the legislator's district, to be prepared to answer tough questions that your lawmaker may ask you, and to also be prepared to ask tough questions of your legislator. This is your opportunity to advocate for your organization and the cause you care about, and it's important to leave some tension in the room in order to push your legislator to advocate on your behalf to create movement. And lastly, to make sure that you include your main message. RBC's main message is that the governor and lawmakers must set aside non-budget agendas and instead pass a budget that puts people on the agenda. Cuts are a choice, and the governor and lawmakers can choose revenue or they can choose cuts to services that families and communities rely on. So now I'm going to turn it over to our role play group.
Representative Tuttle, thank you very much for giving us some time today. We really appreciate it. My name's John Bouman. As you know, I'm the pastor of the Faith Congregation just 2 blocks over here, you know, the big steeple.
Nice to see you.
Hi, Martin Torres from Anytown, Illinois, part of the congregation.
Wonderful.
Hi, I'm Naya Kelly. I'm a homeless youth provider in the community.
Thanks so much for meeting me here in district. I really appreciate it.
Well, yes, and thank you. It's very good of you to host us. You know, as obviously you're aware, this is very, very difficult. We're here to talk about the state budget, the lack of one. In my own congregation, I have people who are low-income people and people otherwise at risk who desperately need programs that are starting to disappear. I have people who work at or run organizations that provide services that used to be funded by the state and are starting to die on the vine. And I have people who are motivated by their values, that this is not what should be happening in our state. There are people who need these things. And finally, I've got people who run businesses who are starting to say to me, what kind of a place is this to do business when we have no predictability, no stability in our state budget system, our basic services. And so we're here today to ask you to take a strong hand, especially with your Leader Durkin. We're going to explain to you the impact of this situation on us, and we want to ask you to bring this material to Leader Durkin and then to meet with us again next week to tell us what's going to be done to get us a budget.
So I just want to be clear. You've got some materials for me. Are there some things you want me to look at?
Yes.
Okay.
Go ahead.
All right, so start. Again, my name is Martin Torres from Anytown, Illinois, which is in the heart of your district.
Yep.
It's so great to be here. I want to share my personal story with you.
Okay.
I come from an immigrant family. We came here from Mexico about 15 years ago. My father works in the service industry and has always worked 2 to 3 jobs to put together enough to take care of our family. Like many immigrants who come to this country, he wants to come here and provide me and my siblings with opportunity. But he's had a tough time bettering himself and really getting himself to a job that can support us because he doesn't speak English very well. It certainly limits his opportunities to get a better job, to take care of us and to contribute to our local economy. That started to change 2 years ago when he started receiving ESL classes funded by the Immigrants Integration Services line item. And he was really excited about that and got some other members of our community to participate. And it's a great opportunity for them to learn English and hopefully provide themselves a pathway to a better job to support our local community and the local economy in your district. You know, more than 1.8 million people in Illinois are immigrants. More than 20% of business owners are foreign-born. We contribute to the economy as much as anyone else. And a program like this helps us contribute even more. And we'd love for you to work with your caucus leader to bring this impasse to an end, to support funding for immigrants integration services without precondition of other reforms, and to support the revenue it takes to support that in other programs.
So can I ask you a question? Was this line that you're concerned with in the governor's budget?
Unfortunately, when we looked at his budget, it's a program that he recommended zero funding for, and it's something that my family can't understand. It's something that people in our community and our congregation don't understand. Immigrants are important to the state and they're important to your district, and we think supporting them and their ability to better themselves in the economy is just as important as some of the things he talks about.
You know, we're in a really dark time in Springfield. We've put up with I think, decades of mismanagement in Springfield. And as a result, we're a little bit at this point in time where things are hurting. I have to tell you, it is disheartening to be in Springfield day in and day out right now. And it's a difficult question. I will tell you that, you know, I have said before, and I'll say it again, that I am happy to support increased revenue. I think we all acknowledge that the state's budget right now. We're spending a little bit more than we're taking in. But I also think these decades of mismanagement mean that we need some structural reforms. And that's my understanding of what the governor's trying to do, and certainly members of my caucus are trying to do, is to rewrite this ship so that we can really look at what the investments ought to be, but make sure that those investments are happening in a ship that's going the right direction as opposed to going sideways.
You know, that just looks to us like putting other issues ahead of the state budget. Mm-hmm. The most important thing for the state to do is to look at what's necessary, what are the vital services, and to make sure those happen before we get going on policy arguments that where there's strong differences of opinion. What's happening right now in Springfield is nothing. There's no governing going on. But let Maya tell.
Thank you again for meeting with us. I am a homeless youth provider, and I'll tell you a little bit about our programming. We serve youth through providing housing, shelter, and food, and give them a place to do laundry. We also provide them with the opportunity to do job training and to enroll in GED classes and to re-enroll in school if they want to, as well as case management and the possibility for permanent housing. For these youth, understand that the governor has an agenda that he's trying to pass through, but these youth that I work with, they are trying to ensure that they can see a better tomorrow. They haven't done anything wrong, but yet they've been put in a situation where they are homeless and they are trying to provide for themselves and trying to give themselves a leg up. Our programming gives them that opportunity. If our programming closes, that's youth that aren't able to get job training. That's youth who aren't able to get the educations that they need in order to be able to provide and to put money back into the economy and to ensure that if the ship is turned the right way, that they are on it and they're able to drive it as well.
Okay. Homelessness is an issue I certainly do care about, and I do know that in the governor's FY17 budget, he did include funding.
He did.
For homeless services, because I think we acknowledge that they are an important piece of what the state has to do. But I want to get back to kind of what you were talking about, because this is why it's a difficult time in Springfield. We can't exist in silos, and absolutely, state services are very, very important. But I have other members of my district who also call me and say, this is an awful business climate for us. And I support the governor's agenda because before I'm willing to invest new taxes, and I'm ready to ask your neighbors to pay more taxes, but they want to see some changing. Absolutely. And so we want to see that change in direction. And so we are in this position where there are lots of interests involved, and there are lots of needs for the state. The state does need to encourage a strong business climate. At the same time, that as the governor's recognized, homeless services are important.
Well, let me just say, speaking of lots of people, we put together this data, and we'd like you to give this to Leader Durkin about the impact of the budget impasse on many different ways and many thousands of people right here in this district. Okay. We would like you to give that data to Leader Durkin. We'd like to meet with you again next week to see what progress has been made to get this budget settled.
So, can you tell me a little bit, where does this information come from?
This information has been gathered from different organizations throughout the state to see how the budget impasse is impacting them and what it means for them not to receive the funding that they have contracted for.
In our view, you and your colleagues have choices. And we have a choice to continue to be the only state in the nation without a budget. We have the choice to sit down and make that the number one priority to the state, and to support everyone by passing a budget and allowing for the state's infrastructure to continue moving on.
I'm happy to look at this document. I'm happy to share information with my caucus about what's happening in the state. At this point, I'm not willing to kind of advocate for a particular revenue position. As I've said, someday I think we're going to have to look at revenue, but I do believe we need to take some steps forward as well on the other side of the aisle in order to make this a better business community.
What's going on now isn't good enough. We have to have a budget. Too many people are suffering. The business climate is suffering. People of faith in my congregation feel that this is the highest priority, and we need you to get to work on it for us.
Like I said, I'm happy to share this with Leader Durkin and members of our caucus, the information about the impacts, and if we want to talk next week, I'm happy to do that
Thank
too.
you.
Thank you.
Thank you very much
for the opportunity.
Thank you.
Thank you, panelists, for that. Now, in the right-hand corner of your screen, there's a control panel in which you can type in questions, and Jennifer and I will be looking at those questions, and we'll kick them over to the panel. So feel free to start asking those questions. Thank you.
Well, while we wait for questions, let's maybe talk a little bit about what, you're often, particularly with certain members of the House of Representatives or the Senate, you're unlikely to get the answer that you want in your first meeting. And so part of, I think, what we tried to show here and what's important for everybody to understand is it's okay to say, I'm going to come back to you. And that you should make them feel uncomfortable if they're telling you no, but they should also expect to see you again.
And I think it's also very unlikely that rank and file legislators are going to have a satisfactory answer. And this was about as satisfactory as it could be. But we have the accountability piece in it, so we'll meet again next week. But the idea is to make it uncomfortable that they can't tell you that there's going to be a budget. And to sort of leave that tension in the room. You'll get a lot of, well, it's not, somebody else.
Are you going to talk to that person? Have you spoken to this person? Have you spoken to that person? Well, I'm speaking to you right now. Not saying it in that way, but, making sure they know that, you are making the rounds, but this is your opportunity to speak to them.
It's also good, Representative Tuttle didn't try to take us there, but a lot of legislators will want to take you into the weeds, right, and say, well, what's your suggestion, right? We can't, should we?
Looks like we're back on.
John?
I have a little trouble with our question and answer technology. What do you guys think went well, and what do you think? Is there anything you think you could have said differently or done to improve the tension? Or
Representative Tuttle was good at deflecting tension. She gave pretty good answers in terms of being willing to look at revenue and so on. So we had to kind of work a little hard to keep the tension going, right? And a lot of legislators are like that. They want to have a friendly meeting, and they'll try to say what they think you want to hear. So you just have to keep pushing them to a place where they can't say that, because there's no budget.
And I will say increasingly in our meetings with legislators, they will lead with, I'm willing to support revenue, just not until something else. So they're trying to give you something right away at the beginning. And so it kind of changes the dynamic.
I think the main tension here too was this thing about the argument about why the turnaround agenda should come before the budget. And I thought what went well there was that we didn't fight and try to argue the turnaround agenda. We just said the whole idea of putting some agenda ahead of the budget is wrong, no matter what it is.
And I think it's important for people to know that just because you don't take the bait, and it doesn't seem like you're kind of squirreling away from the conversation, but it's important you have limited time with the elected official. you want to have a really kind of quick response, but you want to be able to pivot back to your own messaging and to really focus on what you need to say and what you want them to do in a way that doesn't kind of take you down a tangent that isn't productive and utilizes time.
The key with that, and I will just say, because I've been in some meetings with folks, is sometimes when you're trying to listen because you're not going to push back on the substance, you just want to refocus, is that if you do too much head nodding, they think you're with you. Just to be very careful that you're saying, that's not what I'm here to talk about today. I want to talk about this. So it's clear you're not taking a position, unless you are taking a position, but that can be kind of a nervous tick, certainly, that I have when I'm meeting with somebody. I'm just trying to show I'm following them before I can get to my point.
It's active listening.
Well, we got a few questions coming in. One of our questions, our participants asked, it seems like there was conscious effort to highlight the business climate, and they wanted to ask why that was and why you thought that was a good tactic.
I don't think you should overdo it necessarily, but the main argument for the turnaround agenda is a business climate argument. So you can actually diffuse that a little bit ahead of time, ahead of it really, or get ahead of it by saying something along the lines of the business climate. Most of the business climate research I've seen puts right at the top of the list is just stability and predictability, so you can plan. And we have, we're just blowing that to smithereens here. And right next to it, towards the top of the list, is an educated workforce. Which, as we begin to dismantle our colleges and universities and our need-based student aid. So I think there are strong things to say about the business climate, and so it's good to say those, and it also defuses the argument that puts the turnaround agenda ahead of doing the budget.
I also think it's important to note that there's a lot of human service-oriented programs that have a real strong economic impact, and that if those services are done and they meet their objectives, they're going to provide stability for families and greater opportunities for them to achieve greater participation in the labor market.
Something that I always try to bring up is that a lot of these organizations are businesses, like human services organizations. They're not, just quote unquote human services, but they have to meet payroll, and they have employees, and they have a board, and they're a part of the local economy as well.
Those are real paychecks that get spent.
Right. Yeah.
So we have another question coming in. I think just before the sound cut off, John, you were giving some suggestions of when the legislator tries to take you kind of off into the weeds and how to respond to that. I think you lost the sound there. So.
Yeah, I think the advice is simple: don't go there. And
pivot.
You can basically, because that's not what this argument is about. You might get to an argument about that if we're in a budget negotiation, but this is about pushing people to, and it's not an argument that's productive for rank and file constituents to make with rank and file legislators. It really, what it is an attempt to change the subject. And so you can push back by just saying, well, be that all as it may, nobody made a policy decision to make any of these cuts. The reason why these things aren't being paid for is because you haven't gotten a budget done. And so go do it, right? You tell me how to do it, right? And you're the expert. We sent you there to do this.
Yep.
And so you don't get pulled into, well, is it better to do this one or that one or the other one or this tax or that cut?
Yes.
All right, I've got two more questions. These will be our last two, and then we'll move on. One question, they ask if you were prepared with revenue solutions and if you favor a certain one. The second question was whether you think it's good to make a long-term argument about how the cuts to services right now will have a long-term effect, because that's something the governor talks about as agendas being a long-term agenda. So,
on the second issue, yes, fine. You said that people being laid off now, organizations closing, you can't just turn those lights back on. You lose that talent, you lose a lease, you lose a program, It doesn't just come back overnight when there's a budget, and it may never come back.
Yep.
And the people who needed those services, the kids who might have stayed out of trouble, or the people who might have avoided an emergency room visit or a long-term hospitalization, you know, whatever preventive effect you might have had is gone.
Yep.
What was the first part of that?
Oh, revenue options. What?
Yeah, we had revenue options.
Yeah, and so we do have the list of revenue options. And this is the kind of coming down to the weeds. I think you can push it back on them. You can also say, look, we're at a point where we know nobody's actually talking about what they might be comfortable with. Our ask today is for you to kick this going. We're at the first step.
Yeah, and I will say there are resources for that information, right? Mm-hmm. In terms of where you can retrieve that. Voices for Illinois Children has a great one-pager that lists out, maybe 15 to 20 different options for generating new revenue, along with how much money each option would generate. So there's options there. I mean, CTBA has briefs if you want to study up a little bit more on the subject, but that's the type of easy, quick tool that people can use to share so that, they can say, look, we have options, and it's not true that all we can do is cut.
Excellent. I think we'll leave it at there and move on to the next part of our program. Up next, we'll take a look at a role play that 4 of our members did down in Springfield last Tuesday. This is a slightly different scenario than our first role play. In this one, the lawmaker agrees non-budget issues should be put aside, but is telling our members that Illinois needs to take a balance of cuts and revenue. The lawmaker also tells our members that they should talk to the governor instead of him because he has no power. The lawmaker is played by Dan Lesser of the Shriver Center. We're not trying to mimic any particular legislator, so we just call him Representative Smith in this scenario. Our other role play participants were Jim Dixon of the Faith Coalition for the Common Good, Polly Paskin of the Illinois Alliance Against Sexual Assault, and Max Boykin of the AIDS Foundation of Chicago. Our folks did 2 tries. During the first try, our folks did a great job of describing the harm to the local community, but Dan was able to trip them up when talking about cuts, and he was able to avoid responsibility for the budget impasse. During the second try, they were able to push back against the talk of cuts and did a great job of holding the lawmaker accountable. In order to save time, we'll only show you the best of both sessions. This video runs about 12 minutes, so let's take a look.
So we're in Springfield today, and I'm Jim Dixon with the Faith Coalition for the Common Good. And we're meeting with Representative Smith, and with me today
is Polly Paskin, and I work for the Illinois Coalition Against Sexual Assault.
Nice to see you again, Polly.
Nice to see you again.
Hi, my name is Max Boykin with AIDS Foundation of Chicago.
Nice to meet you, Max.
So we're here today to talk to you, of course, about what's going on with the budget. And
what a mess.
Yeah,
what a mess.
Isn't it a mess? So we're here to talk to you about what we see as how you can help solve the mess and move it forward.
That's a tall order, but I'm all ears.
Well, good. Well, the first thing that we want to talk to you about is you having a conversation with whoever you consider the power in your Congress to tell them to let's move this along, because it's really hurting our communities. And not only is it having a short-term effect immediately, but we're seeing a long-term effect because as these agencies are closing, they're losing staff that we will never get back. It is destroying the entire fabric of many of the organizations.
Yeah, it's an awful situation.
No, well, and I want to add to Jim's comment, Representative. The 29 crisis centers, around the state of Illinois. Mm-hmm. We've been providing these services in the state of Illinois really since 1977. We've been funded since 1982. The federal government's 55% of our funding. The state is 45%, and we're in month 9 of no budget. And if you do the math, 50% of our budget is there, and this is impacting survivors. I mean, we're talking about people who are victims of the most heinous crime short of murder. Mm-hmm. And your caucus, the other caucus, the governor, you've not moved as if for the last 34 years you folks haven't been caring about and supporting rape survivors. And I just want to know, where's the shift? How did this shift happen that suddenly we're at an impasse about help the people Jim's talking about, how to help great survivors. Max here.
One of the big things that we've been really trying to push is HR 922, which is the responsible budget resolution. And we're really trying to push above everything else that the governor has been talking about. We really want to push revenue. And we really need for new and for more co-sponsors about that particular bill, particular resolution. Here's a fact sheet specifically on it. And we know that without revenue, without a budget, we have had people specifically in your district that have lost the chance to actually get STI testing for young high school students, and that's causing more stress for families. It's causing more stress for young people and more stress for health departments in general, because this causes for a greater chance of outbreaks.
Yeah, and you know, I share your pain, both not just you, but you and you. I support your programs 100%. I want to see full funding for your programs, but we just can't get this governor off the dime. We can't get him to the table.
Go ahead, Jim.
Well, we know you're having a hard time moving this governor, and we know that because we've tried to move him ourselves and we haven't had any luck. So we believe that the way we can begin to move him is with HR 922, and that's why we're here to talk to you about it today.
Okay.
Because what HR 22 does is it calls for an end to the standoff. Take those issues and set them aside that nobody seems to be able to agree on. It urges lawmakers to protect the vital services to children, to families, to people like Polly works with, like this gentleman works with, people that I know in the community. It opposes cuts to services. And it's real easy to sit there and say, we have to have cuts, and we all know, if we're honest with each other, that we've already had massive cuts. We have agencies that have closed, we have agencies that are laying off people, we have agencies, because they've lost staff, who will never ever have the capacity that they had just yesterday.
Yeah, and I want to acknowledge that this governor has been a new game in town. But governance in Springfield is not. And it is a collaboration, between the executive branch and the Illinois legislature. And I don't feel that in the last 8 or 9 months that the legislature has pushed back on the governor. That's been passed off to all of us out there doing the services in the trenches, working every day, underpaid, facing cuts, and really the lawmakers, as well as the governor, has to take responsibility for this, stand up, say we're for new revenue, we're for new taxes, and stop the talk about cuts. As Jim and Max have both pointed out, we can't take any more cuts, and there has to be more revenue. And we don't have a champion, and you've been a great champion in the past. And I get it, there's a lot of pressure, but at some point, if somebody would crack the ice, if we could get, people, especially on the Democratic side, to step up and say, stop the ping pong, stop this badminton thing, stop this back and forth stuff about who's responsible. Let's just take responsibility, put ourselves out there and say, we're for new revenue. And we're going to stop talking about cuts. You could eliminate the Department of Corrections today. It'd save $1 billion, and that's going nowhere towards solving what everybody says is a balanced budget. It's revenue, and we need you, Representative Smith, to step up and say, let's get some revenue for these services.
I agree. We need revenue to fund your services, to fully fund your services, and many other worthy services out there. But in the end, it's going to require a balanced approach. There are going to be cuts. There is going to have to be revenue in the end. But we can't even get to the end until this governor goes, is willing to meet us at the bargaining table, and he's not willing to do that. And I can scream and shout all day long, bay at the moon, it's not going to make a difference, because this governor refuses to meet with us until we buckle under to all these anti-union initiatives he has. And I will never do that, because I support working people. I support
and we appreciate that, Representative Smith. And we just had a primary here in Illinois, and we saw the results. And we would like you, because we're coming up with a bipartisan approach. We have said there's cuts, we know there's cuts, but we need revenue. So it's time for you to get up from your seat on your side of the aisle and go over and approach some of the Republicans on the other side of the aisle and have a very frank discussion about how important it is and their responsibility to join with you as legislators to move this forward in a bipartisan manner and for them to help you send a message to the governor. We challenge you today to go across the aisle and start having those tough
Jim,
conversations.
I do talk to my colleagues across the aisle. We talk often, but you got to understand, it's a big ocean. We're the little fish, okay? We're the little fish. We do not, my colleagues at my level and I, we just don't have any control over this. It's the governor and the speaker. I mean, let's be honest about it. They're the ones, they're the big sharks. They're the ones who are going to decide this thing.
And we have came down to Springfield many times and had demonstrations across the state, putting pressure on the governor and some of those bigger fish, right? But that doesn't mean that we vote in our legislators. We're extremely supportive, and thank you for all the championing that you have done. But we need those louder, like a voice such as yours, to be louder in those rooms to make sure that that the speaker, that the governor are hearing you and understand that the people in your constituency that are being affected by this budget crisis need these services, need this revenue to make sure that we have a proper actual budget, so people can make sure that they are, like, these families are safe and having the proper things that they need to survive and live off.
We need you, yes, to go across the aisle and say, look, collective bargaining, tort reform, that doesn't mean anything to people dying of AIDS. It doesn't mean anything to rape survivors. It doesn't mean anything to people in impoverished neighborhoods who can't even get minimum wage jobs, never mind an increase in minimum wage. And say, no, let's stop the talk about tort reform. Let's stop the talk about collective bargaining, no matter where it's coming from. And let's talk about the people and the services and the fact it costs money.
Well, you're right.
It's a safety net, because let me just tell you, those are the people they're doing the yeoman's work. They are the folks out of the trenches who are saying, these are people who need a safety net. I mean, these are not people who ask to be poor. These aren't people who ask to be raped. These aren't people who ask to be sick. And we need you to say, let's stop and let's get out of their conversation. Let's get into the conversation of the people.
Yeah, I agree with what you're saying. I think you have done an excellent job of making your case. We're just at this stalemate because we have a governor who refuses to come to the table and negotiate. So
You made the comment.
that's where I think the attention.
You made the comment just a minute ago about your small fish.
Right.
But let me say something. Many times, a group of small fish has gotten together and chased the shark out of the pond. And it's time for you and all the others that consider themselves small fish to unite and push back against the shark. It's time for you to stand up for the people in your district with the other representatives in the other districts and go and say to the speaker, to the governor, to whomever you have to, we are going to change how we do business in Illinois. It's been done in the past, and you can do it today.
And I'd say HR 922 is the vehicle. I'd say that's the flag of the way.
Well, I'll certainly take a close look at HR 922. I was not aware of it before this meeting.
So today is Tuesday, and you're scheduled to be in session also on Thursday.
Right.
So could we meet with you Thursday morning before session? We would have time to look at it.
Let's give me a few days. Why don't we get together next week, and then by then I will have had time, because this is committee deadline week. I got a lot of things going. So
We can't
wait a
wait.
week or so.
We can't wait.
Can you give me a week?
A week will give you.
Can we give
Next
it a
We'll
week?
give you a week.
We can? We think we have till Tuesday?
If we can meet next Tuesday morning, specifically if you have any questions about this particular, about HR 922, and then we can move forward and definitely need the co-sponsorship.
Fair enough.
All right.
Thank you so very much.
Thank you very much.
Now, after those role plays, Jennifer debriefed with the group. In a minute, we'll roll the tape of that discussion. Keep in mind, to save time, we only showed you the best of each role play, so some of the things they're discussing you didn't see. All right, let's take a look.
So we just got done taping a couple of role plays with the group, and I just wanted to ask all of you what you felt went well and what didn't go well. So Dan, you played the legislator each time, and What are your thoughts on?
Well, I thought there was big improvement. The first time I was pretty much in control of the situation. They were identifying what the problem is, and it was easy for me to say, well, the solution is to get after this governor. The governor is the one who's blocking everything. And so, and then there was that opening to say that we need a balanced approach that I got with the talk of 90% funding really gave me an opportunity, really gave me a big opening. So I really didn't feel like I got pushed in the first one. The second one, I felt much more pushed, and I think part of it was more forceful language, but it also was tying me personally to what was going on. Rather than just identifying that there's a problem there was an attempt to somehow tie that to me, that I have some responsibility, or there's some agency or something I can do about it.
Great, thanks. Max?
I think definitely during the second one we put more onus on the legislator, and it is really important to make sure that the legislator knows that they were a big part of what is going on with this budget, and not allowing for the small fish, I'm not one of the leaders, excuse to work, to really own like you are still a legislator, and you have constituents that live in your district that this is harming, and also having fact sheets is really important, because it doesn't allow them to linger on about oh, they don't have it yet. Having a fact sheet with them actually helps, actually show hey, read this, these are the good things that we're moving forward.
Yeah, great, thank you. Jim?
Well, I think we were pretty weak the first time, and one lesson that we can take away from that is that it's good to practice. Get somebody in the room with you before you go and practice it 2 or 3 times, and think of the questions, think of the pushback that you're going to get, and already have thought through how you're going to respond to that pushback. Because that's what we had an opportunity to do in the second one. We knew what the pushback was going to be, so we could respond to it.
Right. Yeah, and that's one follow-up question I just had for you, Jim, because I know you've done a lot of these legislative meetings, and I think, sometimes people feel nervous about pushing back, and they're afraid it's going to damage the relationship with the legislator. So just wanted to ask what your thoughts were on that and what your experience was in having done these meetings.
I think, number one, you come in with facts, and they respect facts. You're honest, you're upfront, and you're strong. They respect you if you are strong. If you come in and you're weak and they let you push you around, then they say, okay, got rid of that one, I don't have to worry about it. But when you bring it to the legislator and you help them own and be responsible, then you get movement. And yes, you can still talk to them tomorrow. You can still get them to take your phone calls. I've done this, like you say, many times. When they do well, I thank them. And in fact, I go overboard in thanking them. I've had some that have done very well. And after a vote, a tough vote, I've posted a thank you on Facebook. So it's good to follow up later. When they do well, thank them for doing well. If they don't respond and do well, then you have to take it back to them and say, hey, this is your responsibility. You are my representative. And I think it's important that we continue to remember they are our representative. Don't let them be a politician. They're our representative. They work for us.
Thanks, Jim. Thank all of you for taking part in that interview.
You're welcome.
So as you can see, it's important to practice. It's important to be firm and hold your legislator accountable in a constructive way. And when you do so, your legislator will still take your call and will still listen to you. Being polite and firm with your lawmaker is definitely constructive. You may also have noticed that the group pushed the lawmaker to get a commitment to meet the following week and get an answer as to whether or not he would co-sponsor HR 922. That was a great example of creating accountability. With that, we're wrapping up our Springfield role play portion of the program, and we'll move on to questions.
And until we have a new question come up, one of the questions that our members often ask us is, what to do next. Many of our members, they have been doing advocacy. They've been meeting with their lawmakers, and our members are experts in specific issue areas, on specific line items, so they have the facts. They can talk about cost effectiveness. They can talk about damage to long-term infrastructure, and a lot of our members feel that they have done that, and they feel a lot of frustration. I wondered if any of you had any able to comment on that.
Well, I think one of the, and I know this has been kind of part of our talking points for a while, but part of the reason why we've incorporated this, will you talk to leadership and then we're going to come back to you, is it's an ask, even if folks aren't there on a particular issue yet, it's I want to see you trying to push the ball. The other thing is while it is very frustrating to continue to kind of have the same sort of conversation, it is critically important. When we talk to folks in Springfield, one of the things that you know is that you will lose if there's not kind of a base amount of noise. They will use it as an excuse to move the other way. And by they, I mean
I'm not hearing from anybody.
I'm not hearing.
Exactly.
Somebody told me there's just crickets on the budget right now, so we don't know what to do. Now, sometimes I think some of that is frankly made up a little bit in order to not move the ball, but we certainly can't give that excuse. So as, you know, I think we all sometimes feel like we're using the same words over and over again. It's really important because the absence of it can mean a step backward.
Yeah, and I also don't think there's any such thing as saturation on the message, right? These elected officials are being bombarded every day, both in district and at the Capitol, with messaging about both substantive legislation and the budget, and it's good for them to continue to hear from their constituents what they want them to do. Even if they told them 5 times, it is the fact that they're telling them this week. And it also puts elected officials in an uncomfortable position because they don't have anything, they haven't been able to achieve progress, right? They're the elected official, they've been put in this position of authority, and they haven't gotten the job done. And that's on everybody, that's on leadership and the rank and file, and I think part of adjusting the message to ask them to talk to leadership is, again, putting the onus on the elected official because they have a role to play, and we want them to know that as constituents, we know they have a role to play, and we're going to hold them accountable.
And just as we get sick of making the same ask over and over again, they get sick of giving us the same response. And at some point, our hope is that then it pushes them to a new response. That kind of effect goes both ways.
And if you're looking for new ways to dress it up, there can never be too many real people stories.
Exactly.
People who are losing their jobs, people at the organizations, shifts laid off, clients who don't get services and the consequences of that. And that because the more that is the subject, the individual stories, and the legislators in a position of that they've really got nothing to say to that. If the conversation's way up here on some theoretical level about turnaround agendas and stuff, they're on more comfortable ground. But if you're down to these stories and you can say, what's more important than this? Get it done. This is basic governing. Get it done. We can have these policy arguments later. I might even agree on some of them, right? So there's always a new round of stories to sort of present basically the same ask. And remember, the idea isn't that they're going to sit there and say, okay, here's your budget. That the idea is that they're going to feel pressure, feel tension, want to bring it to an end, and go and lean on their leaders to get it done.
Okay. We had a question about HR 922, the status of the bill, and who should be targeted. My understanding that it was this in the agenda in a recent subcommittee hearing and may not be looked at in the future, but it's still a good principle, a statement of principle, and something you can ask your lawmakers if they agree with the language of the bill. Does anybody have anything else?
No, you know, it's in Springfield is very much something where sometimes, you know, things look like they're moving and then they stop and then they might move again. And so I think kind of sticking to the principles of the resolution is pretty important because they are in line with our principles and getting folks to commit to push their leaders to move on a budget, and part of pushing that is to make sure that they're also echoing our principles.
So so HR 922 essentially was a gambit to have an ask, sign on, be a co-sponsor, vote for it, whatever. If it's not moving, then the ask just becomes about ask. It's like take this information to your leader, get back to us in a week.
Yep.
You know, if that gambit isn't available, there's another one.
Yep.
One of our panelists down in Springfield that was able to send a message, and he wanted to remind the group that he talks to legislators all the time. They're always very polite and courteous, and that you should feel free to call them up, schedule a meeting. The interactions, are not scary. You just got to be prepared for that. So they're good people, and you can ask them to do what they need to do to make sure there's responsible budgeting and providing opportunity and for folks. But nothing to be afraid of, and good people just need to be persistent.
And they are humans too. Yeah. So, the interactions matter because they are real people too.
Any other questions? I think, I think we'll turn it over to Jennifer to give some closing remarks.
Yeah, sure. So, just want to thank you for participating in the webinar today. We will get the video of our Springfield roleplay up on our website and send all of you a link to that. If your organization hasn't signed on as a member of RBC yet, you can do that at responsiblebudget.org/join. And also on our website, there's a resources tab that has a number of resources that you can use for advocacy. One of those is the Legislative Advocacy Guide, which is a 2-pager that includes a lot of the information that we covered today. There's also a messaging guide with talking points, a 1-page report with specific examples of harm that's being caused right now by the budget impasse, and also a 1-page list of revenue options that can be presented to a lawmaker as an alternative to the cuts. And as always, follow us on Twitter and Facebook for updates and news and advocacy tools. And for any questions following the webinar, you can email me directly at jennifer@responsiblebudget.org.